We're getting back on track here with Kathryn and Emily, but as you know, we won't stay there for long because this is the Going Off Track podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Kathryn, that's Emily, and that was China.
It was. First sprint of the weekend. First big, kerfuffle of the season.
And it was a big kerfuffle.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just start talking about it. I don't think we need to, gatekeep from the world. But yeah, so we had 3 DQs. And I would say known because they the news dropped several hours after the race.
I was very much asleep.
Yeah, I woke up to it as well. But yeah, so Charles, Pierre, Gasly, and Lewis were all disqualified. Charles and Gasly had underweight cars, and then Lewis had the overworn skid plate. Haha, a la Cota 2023. But yeah, not a great showing for Ferrari.
No, and Ferrari, for all that Lewis won the sprint, and that was very exciting, I think Ferrari as a whole didn't have the best weekends, or especially Charles's whole weekend was incredibly underwhelming until his wing broke, and then all of a sudden it's like, why is he so fast with a broken wing? It's because his car was underweight.
Aerodynamics.
Aerodynamics, irony, underweight, among other things. But I thought it was, the whole situation is just, I feel bad for Ferrari fans because I'm sure they're all devastated. But I just think it's funny. Not only has this happened to Lewis Hamilton twice in his career, it happened with 2 separate teams, including a team that it has already happened before, too.
Yeah.
Because this also happened to Charles in that same race at Cota that he got disqualified.
I know. So this was something crazy, wild to wake up to.
Yes.
And then, of course, the entire order essentially shifted. But before we get into the moves, again, we talk about this with liveries. 1,000 people work on these cars. How do you let something like this happen? Granted, I think the underweight, I don't know if it's official, but I think it was a kilo. That's all it was, which is really, really low. And correct me if I'm wrong, is this driver and car weight, or is this just car weight? Because I know that they look at them together and also separately.
I believe it's just car weight.
Just car.
And I think what happened for Charles, and I guess also with Pierre, but it just kind of, Pierre just feels irrelevant. But for Charles, I think that this is very similar to what happened when George got disqualified last year. And he was disqualified for weight on a race where I believe he had also driven a 1-stop. And it was you get a lot of weight from things like the stuff on the tires. And when your tires are worn down, that accounts for the weight on your car. So I do think that's part of what happened there. Whereas on the other side with Lewis and his DQ, they literally changed the sprint format so this wouldn't happen again
with the Parc Ferme
with
stuff.
So the issue with why we have the sprint format that we do have now, if you're new to this, is the sprint format they had in 2023. The car goes into Parc Ferme on Friday, so you have the sprint and both qualifyings. You have one Parc Ferme for the entire weekend, which as we saw in Cota, for a lot of reasons was not working well, but also that's what screwed Lewis and Charles. They're like, okay, so you go into Parc Ferme for the sprint, then you go out of Parc Ferme and back into Parc Ferme for the Grand Prix, which is why we have the qualifying after the sprint race on Saturday. Yes, on Saturdays.
Depending on where in the world we're racing.
Right.
Generally on Saturday.
For us in the States, it was Friday this year. So legitimately what happened with Lewis, and some of it is Ferrari was really towing that edge of the lower the Ferrari is to the ground with all of the cars, the better the car is going to be aerodynamically and the better downforce it's going to have and the better speed it's going to have. And Ferrari just went that too much over the line. The width of a credit card that's how much these margins were on Lewis's skid plate. But if you're under that If you're under that, you're under that. You're out of compliance.
Which to me, like, I understand, but at the same time, with weight distribution, like, I think there needs to be some sort of margin of error, like plus or minus a certain percentage. You know what? Like, I recognize that that's not feasible, but say you park your car on the weight, right? And you're a kilo under. You back the car up, you put it over, then maybe you're 2 pounds over. It's all about weight distribution and how things like level out, which is why I personally have an issue with like the 1 kilo under disqualifies them. Like there should be plus or minus a certain percentage to factor in certain things. And even with the skid, like there's plus or minus 2 millimeters. You know what I mean? Like how far down truly was the skid plate? Like was it enough to truly make a difference? I recognize 1 kilo is enough to make a difference, but yeah, exactly. Like I don't know. I understand it. I do. We need rules. We need regulations. But I personally think there needs to be some margin of error. You know what I mean?
So the answer is I don't know if there isn't, because I haven't read through the technical regulations, because that would just melt my brain more than it already has.
Why not?
Because I am busy forgetting to keep watching races for the 2010 recap. So, but I don't necessarily know if there is or is not a margin of error, but I do understand that, like, if you're under this, you're under this. And I do know that they did weigh the cars more than once, especially with Charles's. For one, they had to replace the broken wing end plate that he drove with the entire race. And you are able to do that before you get weighed. So it wasn't just, oh, well, he broke a giant piece off of his car. Obviously,
that's why it's underweight.
So yeah. it wasn't that. And it was probably more related to the fact that the tires were
worn.
The tires were way worn down, which is why sometimes when you see drivers do one stops on the in lap after the race is over, sometimes you'll see them drive, if there's like a patch of the straight that has a lot of marbles on it that usually you'll avoid during the race. Sometimes you'll see cars driving on that so they can pick up those marbles and get that weight back onto their tires before the car gets weighed.
Which is so wild to like. But I understand the regulation and the need for stuff like that, but like a millimeter or a kilo just seems like how big of a difference really does it make? I don't know.
Big enough to apparently affect performance enough to disqualify 3 people, and 2 that are more relevant than the other one. Sorry, Pierre.
So, yeah, well...
I even forgot where Pierre finished in the standings.
Gasly's the most, like, forgettable, unremarkable driver ever. And he just, like, is there and shows up, and randomly he'll be on screen. I completely forget where he is, and I honestly don't care. And it's, like, not because I'm ill will towards him. I'm not, like, jumping out of my seat to watch
Alpine.
Him or Alpine. Yeah, so...
Yeah.
But... So this did shake up the order. So we got a bunch of moves. So Ocon finished P5, which I think is probably the best finish Haas has ever had.
Ooh.
It might be. In a Grand Prix.
Keep talking.
Okay. Antonelli moved up to P6, Albon P7, Ollie Behrman P8. So yes, if you're counting, that is a Haas double points.
Yes.
Lance moved up to P9 and Carlos moved to P10, which also is a double points weekend for Williams, which is really exciting. This is also Carlos's first points with Williams, which is really exciting.
Even if he got it the same way Logan Sargent got his first points.
Yeah, he did get this by default. But you know what? A point is a point. It's exciting.
So Haas's best result in a Grand Prix was 4th, so he's just 1 off.
Oh, rats. So close.
Yes. But, and also, credit to Haas, they had double points anyway.
They did. They
didn't need it, but then they got it.
But see, this is what I'm talking about, how this season is going to be so good, and I think why we've only been talking about 2025 for over a year now, is because last year of the regulations, they have it all figured out, the margins are razor thin, everybody's shuffled. It's wild. It's crazy. Yeah. Can we talk about the standings right now before I lose my shit?
Yes,
Okay.
I will. Let's scroll down to where I put that. There it is.
So speaking of scramble, right? We had a lot of points up for grabs this weekend with there also being a sprint. So Lando is still leading the drivers. Max is second. George is in third, which makes my skin crawl. Then you have Oscar. And then rounding out the top 5 is Kimi Antonelli, which is wild. In the top 5, you have 3 different constructors, which is great. But you also have, like, no Ferrari.
Nope.
Which is wild. And you have a child.
Yeah.
And
not
Max
only
isn't leading.
Not only that, but you have a Williams driver, a Haas driver, and an Aston Martin driver ahead of both Ferrari drivers. Lewis and Charles are behind Lance Stroll.
I was just going to say, it's Lance Stroll. It's not even Fernando.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And then looking at constructors, this is what's wild. McLaren is leading Mercedes by like 20 points, which is fine. But Mercedes is in P2. Then it's Red Bull.
And then it's Williams.
And then it's Williams. Like, what year is this? Where are we? I feel like we're living in a Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
It's
and
wild.
Like, it's so wild. Not only Williams in 2 races, they have scored 17 points. That is the same amount of points they scored last season in 24 races. So clearly, and a lot of this is on Albon because Carlos is still, figuring out the car.
Yeah.
But and not so great. But this is ridiculous. And like even Alex had 12 points all last year, and now he has 16 in 2 races. So there's so much change, and obviously this is the second race weekend of the year. There's still going to be so many more changes. Alex will probably not stay in P6 in the driver standings, but who knows if the Ferraris keep taking each other out, so to speak. But this is so interesting just to see even like the rest of the constructor standings. You've got Ferraris in P5, then you've got Haas in P6. Aston Martin is not doing so hot in P7 because all their points have come from Lance Stroll. Then you've got the Sauber, the Racing Bulls, and Alpine down in the basement with no points, which they would have gotten points had Gasly not been DQ'd.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at it, yes, Red Bull is in P3, but how long can they stay there with Max?
Because right now that's all Max.
It's all Max because, well, oh my God, I saw a statistic that Lawson, for his first 2 races, has done worse than Mazepin. It made me just giggle.
Yikes. If you don't remember Nikita Mazepin, he's legitimately one of the worst modern Formula One drivers in the history of the sport, and got fired because his dad is very high up there in the Russian oligarchy, and Russia is at war with most of the world right now. And that's ridiculous. And so to speak on I didn't really put Liam in the rundown at all because he didn't do anything, but looks like Red Bull has, between now and Japan, a lot to think about of what they're going to do and whether they're going to flip-flop with Yuki and have Yuki in the Red Bull in Japan, which I think Honda would die to have, and Honda will probably be like, Christian, do it.
Like, I feel like Yuki and Max both drive angry, and I feel like they would both drive how Max likes his car set up. I feel like Yuki would do really well with it, and I don't know why I do know why they haven't tried this experiment yet.
We've
but
talked
it just
about why it
logically makes sense, like, for them to do it. I think he would drive the car really well. He's doing really well. I don't know.
Today's with the results notwithstanding,
well,
but
yeah,
that was mostly just
exactly. But
strategy.
Yeah, that's hard when you factor that in. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, so just looking at the standings, it's so much different from even last year. But if you look back 2 years ago, it was Red Bull was winning everything. Red Bull was P1, P2. We only had one other constructor win a race. And now it's all over the place. Yeah, I don't think Max getting all the points for Red Bull is going to be sustainable. Because even if the Williams end up in like P7, P8 every weekend, they're still getting points.
Right.
But
and it's like Mercedes, if George keeps finishing P3, P4, and Kimi also keeps finishing in the points, then Mercedes is going to have a big haul every week because Mercedes always gets these sneaky points, even though nobody's really paying attention to what they're doing. But I think...
Speaking of that, really quickly, I love how Crofty even admitted that they don't talk about George at all. And I'm like, yes. He's just he's another one like Gasly, but he randomly shows up on the podium where Gasly randomly shows up in P7 or whatever.
I also thought it was really funny, sticking with Mercedes, at the end of the race when they were announcing who got driver of the day. They're like, driver of the day is Kimi Antonelli ? And they're like,
we're not really sure why. He really didn't do anything to
because he didn't.
I know.
He started P8, he finished P8. That's all he did. Even when Kimi was told in the car on the radio after the race, he's like, why? And I think it was Crofty who was like, well, everyone gets a vote, and I guess they all voted. It was only 20%, but it was
he only got 20-25%. So yeah, but
so I want to know what the rest of the spread was, and who else? Because come on, Oscar, driver of the day, obviously. Lando gets it for sneezing. Why can't Oscar get it for winning a Grand Prix? I know why, but
I'm excited that Oscar won. That just makes me happy.
Yeah, but he won. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, before we start talking about the race, we'd be remiss to skip over the sprint completely.
Yeah, so the one thing that you and I were talking about after the sprint race was, are sprints good, or is it just China? And I think it's just China.
Well, but we love Brazil. Brazil's a really good sprint always too, and Coda's always a good sprint too. And so it's not oh.
Well, I mean, I don't always love Coda as a sprint. I'm just I think that the track for China is really good for a sprint race.
I agree.
Whereas I think it is, because as we saw today, last night, this morning, it was a very difficult track to overtake on. I saw somebody somewhere else compare it to Monaco, and how Monaco is just a parade, and sometimes things happen in the back, which really did feel like what the Grand Prix was.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
The sprint and the way the track is set up and how the track was resurfaced all came together for a really exciting race. And then last year the race was in the wet, so that also made that sprint exciting. So I do think it is more China is a good track for sprints, which is literally the opposite of what I have said about the Chinese track in general.
No, but I think this also supports our theory that Monaco would be a good sprint.
Oh, obviously Monaco should be a sprint.
Yeah, I definitely think the sprint was more entertaining than the actual Grand Prix. And some races, some tracks I think are just better for sprints than Grand Prix. Just by the nature of strategy and tire management and, things like that. So I think we might be onto something with It's Just China. But no matter what race, sprint or normal in Brazil, it's always going to be interesting and crazy because of the weather. The weather does not cooperate. That always throws a wrench into things, which is why I think it's interesting for us to watch. And I do agree. Sometimes Coda's a little meh. Because Miami was miserable.
Miami is awful.
I liked when they did it in Austria, honestly, because it's such a short track. Those shorter tracks make sprints more exciting to watch, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even though China is I think China is one of the longer tracks, or that back straight just makes me feel like it's a longer track. But I do think that it's the way that it's constructed and the way it wears on the tires, because you have those hairpin, the massive, ridiculous hairpin turns, which look really cool on TV. They put so much pressure on the tires, it really makes a challenge to go through a full race where you don't have a pit stop. Carlos had to pit because he had an issue with one of his tires, but nobody, you don't pit for a sprint race. And that is a track where you really have to be good at managing it. Your car has to be really good at managing it. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to survive 19 laps on the track in China. Whereas 19 laps on some of these other tracks that we have sprints on aren't as exciting.
No, I completely agree. Well,
and Lewis won the sprint, and Ferrari was happy for all of 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was excited for him to do something, coming back from Australia. Here's the thing. I I'm not his number one fan, but I appreciate what he's done for the sport and how skilled and talented. I mean, he's a multi world champion, right? The worst thing in sports is to see someone so decorated go to a new team and just
struggle.
flame out and struggle. And then, like, they end their career on such a low note that it almost, like, I don't want to say completely trumps all the great things that they did, but it definitely is like a dark cloud hanging over their career. And because of the positive influence he's been on F1 as a sport and how much he's done and how great he truly is, that's like the last thing I think anyone wants. So it's nice that he at least, you know, and it's not the people being like, oh, you made such a big mistake. Like, how dumb are you? You shouldn't have moved. This is horrible. You don't want to see him flame out. Like, I don't think we want ill will towards anyone. I know we're not his number one fan, but I don't know. I don't want to see him, like, completely sputter out, struggle, and then it's just, like, the most painful 2 years watching a world champion, you know, go downhill.
The problem...
Like, it was hard to watch Vettel do that at Aston Martin.
Yeah, but I mean, and it's another one of those things where it's like, it's also like, Ferrari has a documented history of taking champions and sending them on their way out. Vettel is one of them. Fernando is one of them. Kimi Räikkönen is another. So this is a very well documented process.
It's a pattern.
It's a pattern, and it reminds me of how, you know, I did the full season watch of 2016, which is linked above, and I also did the watch of the 2005 races. And when we were talking about Ferrari in both of those episodes, it was the one thing that really stuck out to me is the Ferrari issues that we have been seeing in the Drive to Survive era are Ferrari issues that we have seen in 2016, in 2005, going
it's
back.
Nothing new.
It's not new. And I wonder if Lewis is going to be able to break the pattern there that has basically been in place since the last Ferrari champion, which I think is Räikkönen?
I think so. And that's the hard thing with Ferrari is, and we've talked about this before too, it's such a, you know, storied franchise or team, if you will. And it's like the Ferrari way. All of the drivers, like, learn Italian. Everyone's Italian. It's so prideful of, like, this Italian tradition. And I mean, maybe I'm speaking on being uneducated, but it seems like they're very set in their traditions, and this is how we do it. This is the Ferrari way. This is what we require. And it's not necessarily keeping up with the times, if you will, and evolving and being like, oh, wow, look at this horrible pattern. Like, let's really work towards fixing this.
Well, that reminds me of when we did our genealogy project, when we were talking about Ferrari, linked above, we saw, like, the team principal thing was one of the things that stood out to us the most, because their history of team principals, they had, I don't know, more than half of their team principals didn't last 3 years, and most of those are in, like, the modern era of Formula One, and it leads you to think of, well, maybe the problem is they keep finding people and putting them in this, you know, in this Ferrari system. They struggle with the system, and they're like, oh, well, they're the problem. The system, it's not the system. The system is fine.
Right. Yeah. They need to fix the inside of the house a little bit.
Yes. Will Fred Vasseur get the time to do that? I mean, he's in his third season now. I don't expect him to be another 3 and done team principal like they've had over the years.
I think he's doing pretty well. I think him pulling, I don't know how much of it was him or other people getting Lewis to come to Ferrari, but I think that's, like, a really big feather in his cap.
Oh, yeah.
So I think he'll at least, I truly think, just because, too, with the relationship with Leclerc, I think he'll stay through, like, 2027, 28. But I don't know if he'll, unless Ferrari's winning. But they expect championships. Like, that's the other thing.
Right.
Where Ferrari, we win, we want championships. And having, you know, a poor showing in Australia, 2 disqualifications, like, that's not a great start to your season. You can still make it up. We're only two races in the season, but it's not.
Yeah, we're not saying Ferrari is a catastrophe right now. It's like, Ferrari finished P5, P6. That's not like, that's what we would have talked about, is how that was a really mediocre day for Ferrari, and then the disqualifications came out. But P5, P6 for Haas, for Williams, for
That's
even Mercedes,
like the greatest
would be a great day
of their life. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
it's wild. Well, there's our Ferrari tangent of the weekend. I'm sure we'll have one every weekend just based on how things are going. But
yeah, we'll see.
Okay, so let's get back into podium. So happy for Oscar. I am just such a champion of him. I think he's a great young driver. And you said it best, I think, the other day when we said, like, the difference between Lando and Oscar is that Lando's a driver in a fast car and Oscar's a fast driver in a fast car. And I think that's so telling because, like, I just don't see Lando as a world champion, and I see Oscar winning a world champion, like, driver's championship before I do Lando. And, like, I don't know, maybe I'm dumb. I know Lando's leading the constructor or the driver's championship, whatever, but just watching Oscar drive, like, from pole and winning, it just, like, I champion it. I'm so here for it. And I don't know. I was excited. Good day for him.
This was not the weekend Lando wanted. Obviously, he came out of the weekend still in the lead of the Drivers' Championship, but I think Lando is coming to realize that even though people have said he's the favorite, he's not actually the favorite for this year. And I don't think he's happy about that.
No, and I think it's going to be to McLaren's detriment as well.
I do agree with that. I think that he's gonna throw a little. He's gonna have some moments, and it's not gonna go well for him. But I do, and even, but I will say that I was impressed that Lando was able to survive the brake issues that he'd had, because had there been another half of a lap, George would have overtaken him, and had there been another full lap, Lando would have had to retire the car, and they would have lost the podium. They would have lost the 1-2, which was McLaren's 50th. Like, Lando's race engineer, Will Joseph, really was like, let's just bring it home. Like, let's not risk having a P2. And yes, Lando wants to win races. Everyone wants to win races. Lando is not entitled to it because he was number 2 in the championship last year. This was Oscar's race, and the only way that the race would have been given to Lando is if we saw some nonsense in Hungary last year. And McLaren knows better than to do that. And what is he supposed to do? Tell Oscar to move aside for Lando just because? This is race 2. We're not doing that.
No. And honestly, like, I don't know. I think the whole battle between the teammates, like, is really annoying. And I think Oscar just takes it in stride, and Lando, like, makes it an issue. You know what I mean? Like, Oscar, I think, is the team player. He showed he was a team player last year, and Lando, like, wanted nothing to do with it. And his engineer even said, like, you're going to need Oscar, and we're going to need Oscar this whole season, so you have to be a teammate because you guys can't be fighting. Like, when the Ferraris were fighting last year, they were, like, getting, almost DNFing each other. That's not what you want when you're trying to win a Constructors. So, I don't know. And that's what's so weird about this sport. And it's not many sports where, like, your number one competition could also be your teammate.
Right.
So that's what makes it kind of weird and hard, because normally, football, soccer, basketball, your teammates are your, like, greatest allies, and you're all working together for one common goal. Whereas here it's like, yes, you have that, but it's also an individual sport. So it's kind of like,
it's especially different when you're fighting up for a world championship. Whereas, like,
right, if you're fighting for, like, P10, P11, like, who cares? Like, no one cares that far down the championship. But if you're at the top, like McLaren is with Oscar and Lando, like, it's a big deal. It really is. So, I don't know. They need to figure it out. And then there's George.
George, the only thing notable that, George was in, he ran his own race. Nobody talked about him. It was that Mercedes got their 300th ever podium. So, good for them.
Yeah. the token 5 minutes of George talk on the pod because he did something of significance.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But I don't know. Moving on to who else impressed. Obviously, we talked about Haas, who showed that they are not horrifically slow. You know, Esteban and Ollie, they both finished in the points even before the disqualifications. Ollie had a much better showing this weekend than he did in Australia. You know, front to back, top to bottom. Obviously, we didn't Australia was just very challenging in general, and I loved Ollie's little chow on the overtakes.
He's just like, I don't know. I see them all as like small little baby children because they're teenagers.
He's also 85 feet tall.
Yeah, that too. But they're just so young and like happy to be there. So,
I watched some of the post-race show and they were talking about it and he was like, oh, I feel bad. I feel a little bad about it now. I'm like, oh no, Ollie, you don't have to feel bad about being excited to make an overtake, even though you just overtook a rookie and another rookie. And one of those rookies was in a car that should not be in P20, but you know, such as it is. Liam.
Yeah, good old Liam. Yeah, and then Williams too. So Williams did really well this weekend. Also, Alex Albon led the race, which was
on his birthday.
What is Williams doing leading the race? But that was really exciting.
Yeah, obviously it was because he hadn't pitted and like literally everyone else had. So of course he was. That's what happens when you don't pit and everyone else around you does. Is you end up in the front. But I think it was like the 9th time in Formula One history that a driver on his birthday has led a Formula One race, which also I believe Oscar's birthday falls on Grand Prix Day in Suzuka, so he might have a chance to win on his birthday, which has happened 3 or 4 times in the history of the sport. So that could be really interesting. But yeah, Williams does look pretty good. Obviously, Alex has a lot more experience in the car than Carlos.
Yeah,
but I
Carlos
think
is still...
he's learning the car. Obviously, that can only be an excuse for so long. But he did manage to, I think, overcome a really not great qualifying, and obviously to get to the point where you are able to inherit P10. He ended up P13 before the disqualifications, but that's still putting yourself in a position to get points in any way possible is not always easy.
Yeah, and we have to, take it with a grain of salt. Carlos does not do well on sprint weekends. It's just not his thing.
That is also true.
And I really was not expecting big things from him this weekend. Didn't really deliver big things. Had some issues in the sprint. Got lucky and went around 5 cars to finish way higher than he deserved with a pit. But yeah, I think I'm excited for the first European race. I think that's when we're going to start seeing Carlos kind of come alive in the Williams car, because it took him a little bit with the Ferrari too when he jumped to Ferrari. So,
and the Williams is a car that is a little bit slower to develop in general. So obviously we talked about where they are in the standings and how many points they've gotten. They're way ahead of most expectations. This is pretty early for them to be doing this good for them.
Right.
So I like what I'm seeing out of Williams so far. I'm like what I'm seeing. I don't love what I'm seeing out of Carlos, but this is not as bad as it could be. It's not as bad as we thought.
Concerned about. No.
Right.
And I think something to note with Carlos too is he is a driver who does a lot of the testing, gives a lot of feedback, is very active and vocal about how he wants his car. So he hasn't gone through that process with upgrades and feedback with Williams yet. So I think it'll be interesting to see how his car develops through the season, because he is, very hands-on with that. Whereas it's kind of famously known Max doesn't do testing, will not test the car. That's not his jam. He doesn't do it. Carlos did a lot of the testing for Ferrari, gave a lot of feedback, was very, works very closely with the team to get the car into a position where he likes it. And I think James will really take that into consideration. I think he really trusts Carlos in his opinion. So I think it's going to be a really interesting relationship to see kind of how the car goes from here, which is why I kind of say the first European races, because by then I think we'll have a mini upgrade than a full upgrade. So I feel like it'll be a completely different car for Carlos to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the other thing that we have to remember is Carlos, Carlos was able to test after Abu Dhabi with Williams, but he didn't start with Williams until after the new year. I don't remember exactly when his contract started, but it's the third week of March. This is like, in the grand scheme of his time at Williams, he has not had a lot of in-car time in an actual Williams car.
No.
So this is part of that process. And you're right, it's going to be Europe that's going to really be the indicator of how Carlos is going to do. And if he can start pulling the same results that Alex has, then we might see a flip-flop with like Williams and Aston Martin in that part of the midfield.
Yeah.
Which obviously it's early, but we'll see.
I just want them to do well. I just want Williams to just I don't know. I love Alex. Like, Alex and Carlos are just such nice people, and I love James Vowles, and I love what he's doing. They're just a team that everyone, I feel like, can get behind and cheer for, because it's like they're complete underdogs, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like when I was first introduced to the sport back in 2021, the first thing I remember about Williams was Williams is a great historic team and their car is slow, but you always want to root for Williams and hope that one day Williams will go back to what they used to be. And he who shall not be named, he told me that, and I haven't forgotten it. And I think we're really moving to the point of going beyond like the real deep depths of where Williams was, and they're finally in this position where they're going to break out soon. And I'm really excited to see where that leads to. Agreed.
All right, so on a less positive, exciting note, it was another rough weekend for Mr. Jack Doohan. And I feel like there's so many rumors swirling about like where people are shaking out and where people are going to end up and who gets so many races. I think there's going to be a lot of conversations for a lot of rookies. Not a lot, but like, I think Bortoletto honestly is probably in the best spot, right? Like, Stake has zero expectation. Like, no. Don't crash the car. You don't crash the car, you keep your seat. I think that is his bar.
And to Bortoletto's credit, he spun on the first lap and was like 20 seconds off the rest of everyone for like 2/3 of the race, but ended up in the pack. He didn't finish last because Yuki finished last, but he managed to get himself into P14, which before the disqualification would have been P17, but that means that he was able to overtake Yuki and his teammate in order to get from like literally like half away to back into it. So that is obviously, it's not an exciting thing, but it is still impressive in general.
It's impressive,
He should have been lapped like 3 times if this was like any other driver in any other car.
I agree. But yeah, I think he probably has the lowest bar to meet expectation-wise. And on the flip side, I think Jack and also Liam have the highest. Like, Flavio I think he has such a high bar. He has a full stable of reserve drivers ready to go.
Many.
And
actually, here's the thing about his stable of reserve drivers. He has a stable of reserve drivers, but there's only one who's ready to go and jump into a Formula One car, and that's Franco Colapinto. The other 3, to their credit, are capable drivers, but Paul Aaron, who is also a recent F2 graduate, I wouldn't replace him if Colapinto wasn't an option for Jack Doohan's potential maybe replacement eventually. I don't think it would be any of the 3, because Paul Aaron, would be basically the same thing. The other 2 whose names escape me, one is much older, and I don't know, he doesn't have a lot of Formula experience, and the other one is a Formula 2 driver. So there's really, other than Franco, there's no one else at Alpine that is available to immediately step into the seat.
Yeah, but I still think he has a really high bar for performance, and I don't think he's meeting the expectation that Flavio's hitting.
Oh no, absolutely, and it does not help that he took penalties after the sprint. He has 2 points on his license now, and he also had a second penalty for his fighting with Isack in the Grand Prix. But to Jack's credit, he did look better than he did in Abu Dhabi, I feel. Like he obviously he and Isack were racing for nothing, but I do feel like and maybe this is just because that's all the TV coverage was there fighting for P14, but I didn't hate what I saw from Jack, and I do think that he's not going to get enough time to prove himself to Flavio before Flavio pulls him out of the car.
Oh, 100%. Because, like, in reality, rookies should get a full season. Right. Unless they're crashing every single weekend and it's, like, a danger to those around them. That's a different story. But give them a full season.
If Nikita Mazepin could survive as long as he survived at Haas, Jack Doohan should be able to spend a full season in the Alpine.
How have we managed to talk about Mazepin so much
twice
in one episode? And he hasn't driven for like 4 years.
I know.
But no, I completely agree. And like he won't even get half a season. He'll get, his 3 races, and then it'll be Franco, and he won't be good enough, and it's just a whole thing. But I don't know. I don't even think the car is good enough to get them where they want to be. And so I think blaming the drivers and then, firing the team principal at Spa because they blame them. It's just, Alpine has so many issues.
Alpine just makes me feel very uncomfortable. Another thing that makes me feel very uncomfortable is the strategy that VCARB employed today, because they took 2 drivers who started in the top 10. They had phenomenal qualifyings. And then you've got Isack, who did drive a really good race and ended up with the disqualifications just out of the points in P11, and Yuki, whose front wing decided to break itself out of nothing. A ghost killed his car, which destroyed his race. But the strategy that VCARB chose was one of the worst strategies that I have ever seen. And that you can't save a race with bad strategy.
No.
Like, you can't outrun a bad diet. You can't, save your race. You can't save your qualifying positions with the god-awful strategy that we saw today. They screwed over Isack with, how they pitted them. And, it was bad. And so part of me is like, they need to get their strategy together. And another part of me also worries that they might be like the Haas of a couple of years ago, where Haas was super fast in quali and then just couldn't get anywhere on Saturday or on Sunday.
Well, the thing is like the car does have Grand Prix length speed. Because the issue with Haas was like they were fast for 1 lap, so they could qualify, and then they would just like end up in P17 because they couldn't keep pace.
Right.
I feel like the Racing Bull car can keep pace, but it's their strategy. They're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, obviously the question of the 1-stop, 2-stop was the big question of the whole race, but I do think that they should have changed their minds.
Yeah.
As they were in that second stint.
They didn't question it enough. They didn't kick the tires around enough to make that decision.
Yeah, even like with Lewis did the 2-stop, and Lewis lost he gave a position back to Max, and then Max was able to salvage his very unfortunate, not great race, which also still outdriving that Red Bull. And it's just like, that's, VCARB needs to get their house in order on a strategy side.
I'm sorry, it's Racing Bulls.
VCARB, Racing Bulls, AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whoever the hell they are. That said, their livery is still beautiful, and I am obsessed, which, to the credit of all of the coverage being on, Isack and Jack fighting each other, like, we got to see that beautiful Red Bull on TV a lot more than I thought we would this weekend.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. Well, I think that's all I have to say on the race. We can get into our recap of our predictions, which,
yes.
Of all the points available on the table, you squeaked out one point. Okay, so just to recap our predictions, Kathryn and I pick pole, podium, and either P8 for the sprint or P10 for the actual Grand Prix. We give ourselves points for each one. It's much harder than you think. If you think that we're, blindly doing this, 1, we are, but 2, we actually do put time and effort into this, and it's just very hard to predict what's going to happen. So
I got
being said,
everything once last year. I picked pole, podium, and P10 correctly
by a miracle.
once.
But you
from
didn't
a
even
miracle.
do. But I don't think it was like a typical one either. I think you're like, let's just try it.
I
and
think
it
I was
like
going on
super
vibes.
random. Yeah, it was a for sure vibe pick, and you nailed it. But yeah. So let's start with sprint. So sprint pole was Lewis, which never in a million years would we
Nope.
guess. You picked Lando, I picked Oscar, and then sprint podium was Lewis, Oscar, Max. Again, we didn't have Lewis up there based on Australia. We both had Oscar, Lando, Max, so we picked 2 of the 3, which isn't bad. We picked the other L Brit driver, so
Yes.
close-ish. And then P8 was Lando, which we never would have picked in
Nope.
a million years. You had Fernando, I had Alex. Both did not get P8. And then looking at the race, pole was Oscar, which you did pick Oscar for this
Yes.
pole. I picked Lando, unfortunately.
Hey,
And
we split the
then
difference between the
we
McLarens.
did.
We just switched them. We split them opposite.
One of us would have gotten a point. It just so happens to be you.
Yes.
And then for podium, it was Oscar, Lando, George. Again, neither of us giving George credit.
Nope.
We did not pick him. We had a combination of Oscar, Max, and Lando, so that was yours. And then I had Lando, Oscar, Max. Okay, and then for P10, which this is hard because of all of the DQs, but it ended up being Carlos. You had Isack, which was off by 1 position. I had Lance, who was also off by 1 position. So we split the difference again. But yeah, so you ended up with a point. I have 0, but there's lots more to go. And then just for funsies, we picked a surprise of the weekend and kind of who does a dumb or an oops. So yours, Kathryn, was that Lewis and Ricky are going to improve their relationship.
Seemed fine.
Yeah, it seemed, unremarkable. There wasn't a lot of K1 button action. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was fine.
Maybe half points. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was not that we give each other points for this, but
we give credit where credit's due.
I'll get partial credit.
I do not get any credit. I said that Kimi was going to beat George. And I think I said Kimi's going to have a really good weekend. And by that, I mean he's going to beat George. I still think he had a good weekend because he did finish where he finished, but he did not beat George, unfortunately.
Dinner time.
Bishop's dinner time. And then who's going to do a dumb? So you said that Haas is going to be really slow.
They were not.
Actually got double points. So very, very wrong.
Very wrong.
And then I said that the rookies are going to struggle again. I don't think they struggled. I just don't think they were, there's anything to talk about besides Kimi and Ollie Behrman. But
yeah, I mean, at one point, Ollie was the leading rookie of all of the rookies in the race. But they met the expectations of rookies, with the exception of Liam Lawson, who at the very least should be in the P10 range.
Yeah, no, I think he's really disappointing. And I know we haven't talked about him too much over the weekend, but I think he had 2 opportunities to really turn it around in both the sprint and the race, and he just failed miserably. Now, again, recognizing that the Red Bull car is very difficult to drive because Max likes a specific setup, and they do everything to tailor to Max's needs and wants and dreams, which that's what you do for your number 1 driver. But I think Liam, I truly think he's kind of being hit with a real big dose of reality and some humble pie of you might
this
be
is
in that
actually
seat,
hard.
but you're only in that seat because we're letting you right now because you're really not doing well. I don't think he'll get a whole season. And I don't think he deserves one. And I feel like I can say that because he's already had half a season in another car and then several races in another car. So it's not like this is his first go around. You know what I mean? Yes, that was the AlphaTauri and then it was the VCARB, but it's not his second race ever in F1.
Right. No, I definitely... The easiest thing for Red Bull to do is a straight switch with Yuki and Liam. I know that Helmut Marko doesn't want to do that for all the reasons that we've talked about, why Helmut Marko doesn't want to give Yuki the Red Bull drive before. But I do think, a lot of people are saying, well, why did they get rid of Checo? Even Ted Kravitz asked Christian Horner, you paid off allegedly
Checo.
paid off Checo be in the situation. Now, I still maintain that Red Bull made the right decision to let Checo go, because would
100%.
Checo be doing any better than Liam? Maybe he would be closer to P15 instead of P18, but it still would be the same. The question is, where can they find somebody who could drive the car with Max?
And that's the thing too, like they have such an extensive like driver academy. So why are you not farming them to drive the car like Max? Why are you not instilling that in your academy? If this is like your golden ticket and everything's going to be tailored to him, why aren't you looking for more similarities? You know what I mean? Like that logically would just make more sense if they would just do that. But
yeah. So Red Bull is.
Oh no, you can go.
I was just saying. So I was just going to say, Red Bull is considering what they're going to do for Suzuka. Like we said earlier in the pod, Honda would love nothing more than to have their golden boy Yuki in the Red Bull in Japan. It wouldn't surprise me if we see the Yuki Liam switch. You'll probably hear us screaming. We probably won't do a separate episode about it if it does happen, but we will talk about it extensively going into Suzuka if it does happen. But conversely to the fact that I think that it's too soon to judge Jack Doohan, I don't think it is too early for Red Bull to try switching them.
Agreed. They can always switch them back.
Yeah. Like, yes, you only have so many people that you can put in your cars, which is what we saw after, with Nick DeVries, Danny, and Liam. Like, they maxed out the number of people who could drive that AlphaTauri car. But I think that Red Bull cannot afford to wait as long as they have waited in the past with, like, is Checo going to come out of it? Because typically Checo had come out of it, just not in the last 2 years very much.
Well, and the whole Checo thing, I'm never going to pass up an opportunity to shit on Checo.
I know you're not.
But, like, you also have to think about it in terms of money. Look at Checo's annual salary versus Liam Lawson's. If they're paying Checo that amount of money, which I'm sure is astronomical, to get P17, that's a much harder pill to swallow than paying a rookie salary to get P17. You know what I mean?
I actually saw a graphic today that showed everybody's salaries, and I don't remember what Yuki's was. I think it's like 5 million versus the rookie salaries is 1 million.
Yeah,
like it's, and obviously Red Bull doesn't pay Yuki's salary. That's
salary
Yuki's.
Anyways. Yeah,
but I do remember, like, now that I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, I should have looked closer to see what Yuki's was. But no, you're right, and it might, like, Suzuka might be a good time to make that switch. Obviously, Yuki's going to want to do well at home, even though he kind of has mixed performances.
He hasn't always done
Japan.
well at home.
Japan doesn't really, the track doesn't love him as much as he loves his home. So
yeah,
it'll be very interesting, and it probably means that they're going to make the switch, and then Yuki's going to take a dump anyway, and then we're going to have to wait until Bahrain.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, we also had F1 Academy this weekend, so we can't stop the pod without doing a quick recap. So, Kathryn, I know that you kept up with it. You watched it. I did not, because I had a lot going on this weekend. But how did we do? How did it shake out? How's it looking? I did see, though, on my ESPN Plus app that, like, all of the races are available. You can watch them. Like, it's so nice having them there. You know what I mean?
Between ESPN Plus, F1 TV, and the YouTube channel, if you want to watch F1 Academy, and it also was really helpful because they race before F1. They're obviously, because that's what a support race is. They all happen before the F1 races. So, like, the second race of the F1 Academy was at like 7:45, and the Grand Prix race kicked off at midnight my time. So the times can either be like really good, or they can be god awful if they're in Europe. But it's nice that you can very easily watch them at any time. And this was a very exciting opening weekend for F1 Academy. And, like, leading off with one of the things that is interesting to me is they have split. Obviously, we talked in the last episode about how the first race only has sprint race points and the second race has full Grand Prix points, but there's no difference in race length. to either of those races. They're both
Oh,
13
that's
lap
weird.
races. I thought that was weird. And among other things, they had to shorten the second race because there was some issues with the track because of the other support race. One of the cars blew up and there's oil everywhere. So they did a rolling start. They had 2 extra formation laps. So they had to cut off those laps from the race itself. So it was actually a 13 lap race 1 and an 11 lap race 2. Race 1 was off the walls bananas. We had 3 different safety car periods. And when this is a 13 lap race, that's a lot of safety car periods. Nina Gademan had pole because she finished P8 in qualifying. And with the reverse grid, that gave her pole position. She led the race for 12 and a half of 13 laps, including 3 safety car restarts, only to have to retire the car due to a technical issue. It was absolutely devastating. And I was just sitting there like, you've got to be kidding me. And this is Nina Gademan. She's taken over for Abby Pulling in the Alpine. She was our favorite wildcard driver from last season. She showed out in Zandvoort. She is in it to win it. I saw some interviews that they did with some of like the younger rookie drivers. And then they're like, oh, I'm really excited to, start. And Gademan comes in and she's like, I'm ready to take off and go and just beat the crap. Like, she's Dutch, Max Verstappen is Dutch, and you can definitely tell that there is that type of mindset in like those 2 Dutch drivers. And it was just like, oh wow, she is not messing around. But unfortunately, she did not win. Alisha Palmowski, another wildcard driver from last year who's driving for Red Bull, she had a very exciting kind of fight to the finish with her teammate, Chloe Chambers, who drives for Red Bull Ford, formerly for Haas, to win the reverse grid race in her second F1 Academy appearance, while Maya Vug fought through the reverse grid from P8 to P3. So I think it kind of did what it was supposed to do with...
Yeah. Made it more interesting.
A little bit more interesting. And I mean, the crashes left and right, because one of the things to remember is this is a learning series for like some of the drivers, like Felbermeyer, who races with Sauber. She just moved up from karting to single seater. So this is like brand new for a number of the rookies that we have this year.
Terrifying.
I mean, a little bit. I was like, oh, like after the restarts, I was like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. It crashed again. It was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, that's always the risk that you run with some of these support series, is like the experience level is way, way down. So you never know what you're going to get. Okay, and then race 2 is a normal start. So they qualify however they qualify. That's how they race.
Yeah, so Doriane Pon, who drives for Mercedes, she finished P2 in the championship last year. She got Maya Vug, who drives for Ferrari, from the start and just kind of, I wouldn't say she went off into the distance, but she kept the margin between her and Vug wide enough that Vug didn't really have a chance. Gademan had another strong start and then accidentally got tagged by her teammate Tina Hausman, who drives for Aston Martin, managed to kind of come back through the field to salvage P10 because somebody else had a penalty that dropped them down. So she, like Carlos, got a little lucky this weekend to get points on the board. And then rookie Alba Larson, who has taken over for Nerea Marti in the Tommy Hilfiger that you and I love, she is one of the really young drivers, and she managed to maintain her P3 position for most of the race before she was overtaken by Chloe Chambers, who had 2 podiums over the weekend for P4. But she shows a lot of promise, especially for a driver that is so young. I think she's like 16.
Oh my God, that's wild.
Yeah, like the age range is one of the key factors, because this is really a youth, or like you're not going to get a Fernando Alonso equivalent in F1 Academy. It's like 16 to 25 is the age range, and then once you've done your 2 years, you graduate out. So I think we're going to have a lot more of a mixed up podium and mixed up points finishes this season compared to last season, where it was really everyone you expected to score points scored points, and everybody who you expected to not score points didn't. So I think we're going to have a lot more of that mixture, and we're going to have a few more contenders for the championship with Pon and Vug compared to last year, where it was just Abby and Pon was trying. So I think it's going to be a very interesting season, and I'm really excited to see what we're going to have coming forward.
Yay. And so they have 6 races left. Because they only have 7 this season. Okay.
Yeah, they have 7 race weekends. They have 2 races each weekend. Next time out, we will see them in about a month from now in Saudi Arabia, which is a track that they've been to before and that they've also been very competitive at. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Standings wise, very early, obviously, but Pon is currently in the lead with 5 points ahead of Voog. Then we've got Chambers in the Red Bull Ford in 3rd, followed by Palmowski in the Red Bull Racing Car in 4th, and then Alba Larson in that Tommy Hilfiger in P5. And then on the constructors side, not that it matters. What's interesting on the constructors side is like obviously Campos, who was like solid middle of the pack last year, they're now in the lead because they've got all the people who are scoring the big points now are on that team and on MP Motorsport. Prema is going to have a lot of work to do if they're going to want to be 3-time champions. I don't necessarily know how that's going to go. But what's interesting is High Tech only has 2 full-time drivers, and then they also have the wildcard driver. And there's not really a guarantee that the wildcard driver is going to score many points. Unfortunately, Shi Wei, the Chinese wildcard driver, she really struggled throughout the weekend. She was way out of the points in the second race. In the first race, she was one of the first crashes that caused the safety car. So it's going to be interesting to see just how far behind High Tech is going to be in the point scoring this year, because you can score a lot of points when you have 3 drivers and 2 races each weekend.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're going to get a lot of points pulled to High Tech, especially since they do have a pair of rookie drivers. So that's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
Yep.
We have China. So Suzuka's next. I'm so excited.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And I'm gonna be honest, it's off track adjacent for my off track moment of the weekend, but I really was here for the fashion this weekend. Like between the wags and the drivers, I thought it was like bringing me back maybe 4 years when it felt like every weekend was a fashion show. People were showing up, showing out, and I really appreciated it. So I did nothing like too exciting happened off track, but I really appreciated like the effort of the fashion. So
yeah, I saw a picture of Charles walking in with his girlfriend, yes. And I loved her dress. That was
obsessed.
Yeah, that was like I think the outfit of the weekend, out from the F1 driver adjacent. Obviously, there were a ton of Chinese fashion influencers and models that were there throughout the entire weekend that were like all going off in the fashion, but she really stood out to me.
Oh, okay. So super off track moment, not off track moment, off track topic. So my really good friend is from Shanghai, and she sent me pictures, and she's like, Emily, like, do you know who these people are? My friend is at the F1 race. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I found, like, she's sending me all these pictures of her friend who's there, who, like, still lives in Shanghai. And she's, like, doing the grid walk. I'm like, who is your friend? How do I become friend adjacent? Like, she's like, oh, is this, like, special? I'm like, yes, like, you don't just walk on the grid. And I'm like, oh my God. She's like, oh, well, yeah. I don't know, maybe she knows somebody. I'm like, I want to know who she knows, because she literally has a picture of Lando, and I'll have to send this to you, but of Lando and Oscar, like a foot away from her.
Oh my gosh.
Zoom. And I'm like, I think I'd pee myself. Like, I would be so overly excited. I don't think I would be able to handle it. But I'm like, cool. Like, just casually being like, oh, like, do you know who these people are? I'm like, yes, of course I know who they are.
Yeah, anyway, it's like is this event a big thing? Yeah, and then the other thing that happened, which is not nearly as exciting as that, is unfortunately Eddie Jordan, who is a big part of Formula One, especially like in the 90s. He passed away. He had some very aggressive cancer that I think was diagnosed about a year ago. It was very unfortunate. Sky Sports and Martin Brundle did this really great package on Eddie Jordan and his impact. Obviously, he founded the Jordan Racing Team, which is part of the long history of the family tree that is now Aston Martin. plug the genealogy series, as you know, or if not, it's in the show notes. But he had such a great impact. He was a great influence on the sport, and like everybody had like all these great stories. So like throughout the entire weekend, it was like, what was your story? Like, what is your Eddie Jordan story? So I really appreciated the, you know, everything that they did. And Aston Martin had some stuff on their livery for him as well. So it was really nice recognition for him as, you know, as he had gone through the weekend, because I think like it had just been announced right before the weekend started that he'd passed.
Yeah, it's always nice when they do tributes and they hit and like they're well done, because sometimes it feels like very last minute and it's like painful and awkward, but it's always nice when things actually come together, especially for someone who, you know, maybe is not the name that everybody knows and thinks of, but had a very, you know, big role in F1.
Right. And I mean, if you've been in F1 longer than we have, you probably know who he is and know the impact that he'd had. But I think that they were really good at like conveying it for the modern Drive to Survive era of Formula One fans and all that. And I do think that the tributes that they did throughout the weekend, and I know they did one on track with everybody as well. So that was all really nice. And I'm sure the family appreciated it.
Agreed. All right. Well, that is our China recap. So nice long one for you there. Up next, we will have our Suzuka prediction podcast out, but that's going to be not this week, but next week. So we'll be off for a week just because there's no race, so we won't have
And anything. I haven't finished watching 2010 yet, so.
And I'm traveling for work, so let's just keep adding to the list of whys. But Suzuka is one of our absolute favorite tracks. Super excited. It seems a little early this year, but...
Suzuka has been moved up from the fall, but it is about the same.
That was a last season change.
Yeah,
right?
so it's about the same as it was last season. It's just, it feels like Suzuka used to be like one of those, like you could win a championship at Suzuka. Now it's, you could bring your car upgrades to Suzuka if you're really early and need to really change things up on your car. So it's gonna be an interesting race.
At Suzuka.
You might have a new driver, and even though we did get a lot of we got a lot of really interesting running in China for like seeing drivers driving in the dry and all that, but I think to have a regular, hopefully the weather is clear in Suzuka, because if not, then this is not going to mean anything. But if we can have like 3 clean practice sessions plus the Grand Prix, this will really be a very valuable indicator for how drivers and teams are going to perform this year. So I'm very excited to see what we have in Suzuka in 2 weeks.
Agreed. I think it's the race that I've been most looking forward to, because I think it's going to be the true tell all of where we're shaking out. So
yeah, and it's also Suzuka, and it's beautiful, and we love it.
Suzuka. The cherry blossoms, I know. All right, well, yeah, so that will be out in a week. Get excited. That's when our China recap episode. Thanks for going off track with us, guys.